Check 1, 2. Okay, it's time to get started. I'll call this special meeting of the Lawton City Council to order. Please stand for the invocation by Mrs. Chapman and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Father, we thank you. Father, we thank you for this day. Please guide and direct each one of us on this dais to make the best, most secure decisions for the citizens of Lawton. These are the people who we represent, and we want to do as best as we can for all of us. Father, please protect us over these next 2 days as winter weather is once again going to be coming in our area. Thank you for every blessing that you bestow upon us. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, please be seated and please call the roll.
Hankins. Harris. Chapman. Burke. Hampton. Fortenbaugh. Johnson. Warren.
A quorum is established. Business item number 1. Consider discussing and providing input on the Lawton Parks, Sports and Recreation, Trails and Open Spaces Master Plan to be included in the final plan. Larry.
How about that? Back in December the 7th, this item was brought to council, and it was council's desire to basically give some additional time for review and the ability to go over the plan because it is a substantial document. We did bring back Nate Clare from Happen Associates, and I believe he has his staff that's streaming the meeting to hopefully help answer any questions as we kind of move along. But this is an opportunity for you to weigh in again on the plan itself, and if there's any questions or concerns that you have, we welcome that input so that we can incorporate that into the plan and bring back a final document for you to approve.
Okay, thank you. And 2 residents have filled out speaking forms. Mr. James Smith, 1401 Southwest B Avenue, number 316. Mr. Smith, come on up to the mic, and you have 3 minutes.
Right. Thank you. Okay, can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is James Smith. I live off of 15th and B here in Lawton. I'm very honored to be able to speak my mind about this project. I mean, I've only been in Lawton for about 7 months, but I think we're going to be here a while. So my concern here is with dog parks. I mean, I know a lot of the talk has been about the sports complex, and that's all well and good, but I'm not an athletic person. But my dog is. So I know what I've been told is that there is plans for at least discussion of a new dog park somewhere. And I really don't want to, say anything bad about anything existing. But we feel that it's just not safe to take our dog to the current dog park. And having a newer facility in a newer location, maybe a little less isolated, could restore some safety for fellow dog owners that want to take their dog out and let them run free. I've noticed a lot of obviously, take 3. I've noticed a lot of military people down here with dogs that maybe don't have a place to take them on base. So I think having a dog park would improve the city in some very good ways. I just feel like maybe something a little newer, something a little less remote I mean, it's not like I'm advocating an armed guard or somebody from Parks Department sitting there checking IDs or anything or doing COVID tests. But just, something a little newer, I would think, and a little closer in that's easier to find. It took me 3 months to find the one we have now, and that was using MapQuest. And just 2 cents about the sports complex. I really think that Thomas Park is really not the place for that. My experience with Elmer Thomas Park has been very positive, and it's a park. Having a sports complex there would just, totally change the dynamic and the effect of that park. So, but like I said, the fight I have with, it's not really what I wanted to say. The dog I have in this fight is for for a new dog park. So.
Okay, well, I just want to tell you, welcome to Lawton Fort Sill, and here's your I Love Lawton Fort Sill pin, okay?
Who do what?
This is for you. Welcome to Lawton Fort Sill.
Oh, well, thank you
Okay?
very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Okay. Grab it.
Here you go.
Are we done? Oh, okay.
All right, and thank you for coming, Mr. Smith. And the next speaker is Mr. Gary Secor. Gary lives at 1609 Southwest Sandra Circle.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Council, and thank you for everything that you all are doing for the City of Lawton and trying to make it a better place for us and my grandkids. I've been actually in Lawton longer than I've been a resident of New York. I'm not even a resident of New York anymore, but I've been here since '84, and I love it here. I'm here to talk to you all on behalf of the veterans of Southwest Oklahoma, Comanche County Veterans Council, the VFWs, the American Legions, in thanking you for living up to an agreement that was made years ago in reference to the Veterans Memorial Walkway to go around the Lake Elmer Thomas. It's been a pleasure working with Mr. Burke and the current Parks and Rec. They are the most friendliest people that I've ever seen working for the city government, excluding you all, of course. But I want to thank you all for all the veterans, from all the veterans. It's going to be nice. We're going to be dignified. It's going to be serene up there in the park, and people from going down I-44 will see the memorials there and eventually swing into Lawton and visit them. So I would like to, again, thank you for that, and thank you for keeping the veterans of Lawton in your mind, and also for keeping in mind that, you honestly live this. One nation that forgets its defenders in itself will be forgotten one day. And you bring that down to a Lawton. And thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Thank you for
I don't
coming.
get anything?
I'd give you a pen, but you already have one.
Well, damn. Oh, excuse me.
Of course, it would balance.
Now I feel like I'm back in a commissioner's meeting.
It would balance you out with one on the other side. Here you go. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you coming. Okay, with that, I don't really know how to go about this, but and I'm open to suggestions, Council. Mr. Burks make the opening comments, and we might just start down here and get ideas, starting with our most senior council member, Mr. Randy Warren.
That's short for old man. I had a question, and I don't know how to go about this because I haven't completely taken inventory of my 2 new parks that I just adopted. But there's a couple that I'd give up. I don't have a real problem with that, but my issue is I don't really want to give up a lot of green space if the citizens of my ward aren't going to get the promise of quality park for what's left. Because I looked at the map and I'm trying to centrally locate some of the larger ones so that we could have a nice place. For instance, one of the ones that I thought we could get away with losing was Putney Park, which basically is a slide and I think some metal equipment that's from the 50s and full of rust, and it's a drainage canal basically. But then I got to thinking, why don't we keep it, because it's a fairly large piece of property, and go ahead and put a walking track there and actually make it nice, and then close maybe 2 other parks in my ward. So I don't know, as far as discussion, I feel like I got to have some kind of promise or some kind of understanding that when we all give up these parks, that we're not going to end up with just less parks. We're going to have some quality parks that are remaining, if that makes sense. So
Fewer parks, but nicer.
But yeah, fewer but nicer. Because, if we do away with a couple of my neighborhood parks, I don't think that there's going to be a real big problem from the citizens that live around them if we can provide them one that's within walking distance, that's close, that's got some quality activities that are there, walking track maybe, or just something rather than the field that it is now. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I don't know. Thank you.
My main concern was with how we assess some of the parks that we might repurpose. Some of them didn't score that well necessarily, but I know they're used heavily at certain times of the year. And so I would just hope that before we start repurposing, we get to talk about that again before we actually pull the trigger and get rid of a park.
Mayor. Just real quick, and I kind of felt like this would probably go this direction, as we start talking about the recommendations from the plan as far as the potential repurposing of parks. Just like to remind council, keep this in mind, this is only a suggestion. It is an opportunity for us to systematically evaluate these parks. Whether we close a park or not is 100% up to this body. And so as opposed to going through specific parks and saying, well, I want to keep this one but get rid of this one, you have the list. And as we start to, once we endorse the plan, I would say that we would get a little more into the weeds and start really identifying those specific parks that we can all agree on and that you can agree on within your individual wards that makes sense for you to turn loose of. And then there's the vetting process. We have to make sure that the deeds and anything that has to do with the property itself and how we acquired it works out, that we can do those things as well. So at the risk of, I don't want to cut anyone off, but I'm just saying, rather than go through each individual park, we may want to think about, just looking at it, at the plan as a recommendation, per se.
Okay, thank you, John. Don't go too far.
That's a great point that Dwayne just made. There are a lot of parks that have specific dedications and limit what we can do with the land. So that's good to keep that in mind as we go through this discussion.
Go ahead, Mr. Hampton.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's fantastic that we're at this place that we're at now as a city, both with the council and with the city administration. Team is a big word to me, and for us all to get together as a team and begin to really take an overview of our city and begin to make evaluations is important. In that process, Dwayne, as we all know, sometimes you feel like you're bulldogging the situation when you begin to become somewhat critical. But in those critiques, you're really wanting to make sure that the citizens' voices get heard, especially those of us that are here on the council. as everybody know, I have a personal opinion on Ward 5 with all the old parks that I have, especially a lot of them being WPA, so we don't really have to visit that right now as far as what I think. But I have had some calls from some citizens with some parks that I kind of thought maybe weren't that worthwhile to the city as a whole and didn't get really visited that much, but they were saying that when their grandkids visit, they like to go over to that park and spend time. Now, with that said, I did attend one meeting, and there are some variables that were put out that where they were deciding on the number system as to whether a park should be considered as a park to be repurposed or a park to keep. And I felt like in that vetting process with those variables that maybe some of the parks were missing, some of the variables were not citizen friendly from the standpoint that when we talk about the citizens, there's sentimental value to some pieces of land that are designated parks, as well as historical and some other issues like that. And I think those are important variables as we move forward, because the ownership of this city and the parks and the park plan is really belongs to them. Just it's funny. If you go down I Avenue, there's most people don't know this, but it's hollow from 10th Street all the way down to 2nd Street. So it's like a big long cave underneath there, and it floods very badly sometimes. And there's several parks on I Avenue that it's a poor neighborhood, of course. But there's several parks on I Avenue that when it floods, they just get ripped apart, the chain link fences and everything else. And I go by some of those parks, and it's funny, being the poor neighborhood, I'm thinking, man, the fences are, now it's cleaned up now, but the fences were laying down, grass and weeds all in the fences. But there was like 25 kids out there playing basketball. And I looked at that and thought, what a funny thing and what a predicament for us to fix those parks. Those parks got fixed several times. There's a tennis court there. All that's there is a tennis court and a basketball court. But that little basketball court, for some reason, there in the middle of I Avenue, just gets all kinds of action. And I think with the place that it needs to be, I'm thinking my opinion is we need to repurpose that or put that in some other place. But obviously, it gets a lot of traction. But in closing, I think that it's so important and very, very positive and a very good thing that we are doing this. And though we may begin to critique and be negative, sound negative about some things, we're actually trying to tweak it to make it a better plan. So I'm thankful that we're doing this, Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Chapman.
Yes, I reached out to people who live in my ward, and I have actually had zero communication on which parks that they felt like we could give up. So that's a little frustrating because I don't know how all my parks are used. I drive by them and see if they are being used at different times. But so that's sort of frustrating on my part when I don't get any input back from people who live in my ward. I know some are very difficult to get to. Some of them, it's not in a good place either. But so I don't know what the answer to this is.
And Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I went out in the last couple of days and visited every one of these parks in my ward. And so for the most part, I think they're functional and they're being used. But there are two of them, one over in Turtle Creek that is, like Randy said, it's basically a drainage ditch. You have to go between two houses to get there. It's just a small walkway, and you go down, and it's clear. There was at one time there's a picnic table. Somebody's been down there beating on it with a sledgehammer and destroyed that. Some of the swing set equipment and slide equipment's been mangled up. And I talked to the neighbor that lives next to next to the path going down there. He says the only people he see going down there, they go down there at 2 in the morning. Pretty sure they're doing drug deals. So I don't know exactly, Mr. Burke, what we think we could do with those or repurpose them or, 2 of my parks are completely enclosed by neighborhoods. So that, again, there's only one path back there. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. I'm sure they're not being used heavily, but again, I don't know how to repurpose those because there's no road going in there. You can't redevelop it. So I'm not sure what the answer is as well, but at least 3 of mine, I think we could. If they were gone, they wouldn't be missed. So.
I'd say that's the ones that need to be gone. Thank you, sir. And Ms. Hankins.
Well, I too have acquired some new parks and lost some. So if I would be afraid to send or go with my grandchildren to these parks, those are the ones that I think are too isolated to be safe. And I think that's something that we probably have to take into consideration. The Wayne Gilley Park is always, not always, not every day, but it is active at times with kids playing soccer and that sort of thing, and it's real visible. So I think that's a good one that's being well used. Harold Park is too isolated. It's really back in there. Baltimore Park and Atlanta Park are just off of an alley. So there, maybe somebody that lives close to those would want to take those. I'm not sure that I'd want to send my kids there either. We gave Butch Settle Park, whatever the legal word is for Butch Settle Park, where we gave it to the Apple Run. And that's an excellent thing, I think, when we can do that, because they can use the grass there for their residents to play in that. I thought Stevens Park might be marketable, but and Charlie Ray Park I'm not sure about, but I'm more than happy to hear from my constituents if you'll give me a call or send me an email. I haven't heard, I want to hear, so don't be afraid to call me or send me an email and express your opinion. I'd be happy to listen.
Thank you. Ms. Chapman.
I don't know if this goes to John or Dwayne. Do we have a list of parks that have certain requirements out of our jurisdiction for land use?
We do. We have a matrix right here that lists every park by ward, and if there's any deed restrictions or land use restrictions or reversionary clauses in the dedication language, it'll list it in this matrix, and I can email that out to everyone today. Yep.
Yeah. So, and in that regard, thank you for asking that question. They just handed me this. I just noticed because Mr. Harris, who mentioned Harold Park? You did. Okay, in Harold Park, the deed states that it's used as a public park, and if it's not used for public purposes, it reverts to the owner. So I presume that means, this is a question, that the council could put that and say, we want to give it back to whoever gave it to us. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So if the deed language says that, this interest in real property is conveyed to the city, as long as it's used for a specific purpose and the city no longer wishes to use it for that purpose, we can give it back to the grantor's heirs.
What about when one such as, and I don't even know if this is being talked about, I'm just picking an example. It says on Gooch Acres, it says the deed states for public park to any public use or public purpose, including public roads and highways, but it didn't address reversion. What happens? Does that mean we can't give it away? We can't do anything?
You can always give that back, but I think with that specific park and the language in that deed, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of what the city can use it for. But you can still if the city were no longer interested in using it for a public purpose, then the city can give it back to the grantor.
So another question that I have is, what are some of the ideas for repurposing? Because it's my impression, I don't know that I'm right, that when we tried to sell some of these, it didn't go so well. Is that a correct impression?
I don't know the specifics on which parks you're talking about. I can tell you, though, some of the parks that you're referencing, we consider those like pocket parks. We obtained those when new plats were done and a certain percentage of the property had to be dedicated park space, and so that's how we got a lot of these. That would be something as we move forward after the plan is adopted, that staff would start looking at which parks literally that we could make some changes to, whether it be deeding it back to the previous owner or maybe divvying that up, say some of the pocket parks and the existing property owners, giving them some of that space. We just have to explore what would work best. There may be some parks where we could create access and make them marketable and for residential development and things of that nature. This is, as far as the parks that you're talking about and then what we're looking at potentially repurposing, it's just to give you more of an objective overview of these are the ones that are lacking either amenities or access issues or they may be redundant. You may have a park right next to a park. And so is there really a need to have two within, 2 blocks of one another? So I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know about the sale on those. I wasn't involved in any of that, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question.
Go ahead.
Mayor, I was just going to add, so in cases where there's a reversionary clause in the deed and it comes back to the city, and I know a lot of these were dedicated many years ago, and the grantor is deceased and their heirs are no longer living with us. Another option would be getting another dedication with different language in it. We could also approach them, and that would be a viable option too, to use it for some other purpose. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
City Manager.
Mayor and Council, particularly Mr. Hampton, thank you so much for your kind words. When staff worked with Hoffman Associates to develop a master plan, it was with the intent to stimulate conversation, which is what we've had, and to provoke thought on how do we go about best serving our citizens. And I want to use a line the mayor has been using this year. It's great things are happening in Lawton, Fort Sill, and this document is a guide. A master plan is a guiding document. It's not a set in stone document, but it's a document that allows us to go back and look and see what the professionals recommended. And when they recommend a solution, and somebody makes a suggestion that's really outside of that, far outside of that, we can go back to the master plan and say, well, does that really fit within the scope and the idea of what we adopted for the master plan? So as we move forward with this master plan and when you guys adopt it, at that point, that's what we'll use it for, is that guide zone, those milestones along the way as we reach those points in that master plan where we maybe lessen the amount of parks we have, increase the amount of maintenance that we have on other parks as we budget, as we move forward. So I just want to say thank you to the council for working with staff and the approach that staff has taken and the council's taken to produce a document that's an outstanding guidepost or a guide statement for us as we move forward.
Thank you. And
Can I ask you, with any plan, plans always change, and you're right. Plans are a structure. I did have one question. Are we really more wanting to take the priority of repurposing and figuring out how to repurpose these plans? Are we more on the lines of trying to get rid, because I've heard both, get rid of the parks, from i.e. let's go ahead and make a list of which ones we're just going to repurpose. And under that covering of repurpose, it seems like there's been talk of giving them back to the people that built the additions and other ideas. But In that repurpose, Dome, are we wanting primarily to repurpose them for different use? Or are we really wanting to try to get rid of some of that park property that we own?
I think the overarching, and you guys correct me, right, but I think the overarching reach this or aspect of this is we have too many parks and not enough dollars, right? So in that aspect, reduction of parks, however you choose to do that, whether it's through repurposing or whatever the case may be, the goal is to reduce the amount of park acreage that we have so we can better maintain the parks that we have, whether that's through reversionary clauses, whether it's through repurposing or whatever the case may be. It reduces the acreage that we have and our ability to maintain. Is that fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment, and I wanted to just add Nate Clare with Half Associates to add on to what the mayor asked earlier about what were the options, and then what you were saying, Councilman Hampton. So what we've identified in the plan as potential options for repurposing, it can mean a number of things. One is the land is sold by the city and developed as something else. That could be sold to a home builder for residential development. It could be sold, depending on where the park is and the surrounding land uses, it could be sold to a commercial developer and developed commercially. Another option would be that if it's an existing park that maybe sees low use, that has existing equipment that maybe is outdated, that equipment gets removed and it just becomes open green space. Now, one of the things that we talked about is the city still has to maintain that, and that's one of the big challenges that we're doing. So an alternative to that is maybe that green space gets overseeded with wildflowers and native grasses, so that maybe you go in there once a year and knock it down, but it becomes kind of a prairie-scape, landscape. And then the other one is that, if it's a neighborhood park, maybe within an existing neighborhood association, homeowners association, that land could be given back to the homeowners association, and then they would take over responsibility for maintaining it. So those are a few options. There's probably a few more, but just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you. Now, some time ago, Lawton Public Schools approached the city about doing some land swap. What's going on with that? Because just a brief visit yesterday, they said they'd take the entire Grandview Sports Complex, and that would certainly take a maintenance load off. What are the thoughts and what's going on with this?
We did receive a proposal, just a tentative proposal on some potential land swaps. Myself and the Parks and Rec director went out and actually put eyes on several of those pieces of property. I think there were 4 in total. Some of them are pretty much what I consider a no-brainer that we should do, and then others we need to really think about in the sense of we're trying to eliminate the maintenance associated with the number of acres that we have currently to maintain. Taking on additional park spaces, we're going the wrong direction to some degree. So we have to really look hard at what that looks like. I will say, I think there's more emphasis now, and I'll go back to Councilman Hampton's comment. I feel like there's a little more emphasis going towards regional style parks with more amenities and better facilities and things of that nature, where we can emphasize and prioritize those parks and really make them destinations, if you will. But to do that, we have to reduce the size of the burden on the Parks and Rec staff. So when we start looking at the potential of taking on some of these additional park spaces, we went and looked at them, and a couple of them are really good potential candidates for what I would consider a regional park per se. But they do add substantial acreage to our maintenance crews. We're talking about another 10 to 15 acres probably, somewhere close to that. I did stop and talk with some citizens that own property right across from these parks and got just a little bit of feedback. Most of the places that the LPS is looking to trade with us have something on them like a backstop. They really don't have any playground equipment. They're more or less open fields with a backstop or a soccer goal on them, and my understanding is that's predominantly what they get used for, is seasonal use for kids' teams to come out and practice, and that's typically what they're used for. But tremendous amount of space that has to be maintained and mowed, and right now LPS has that burden and not us. So we'll have to really evaluate whether or not that's something we want to do. There was one of the properties that might be an option for development. It's in a specific area. We already have a playground there, and it's really not used for anything from what we could tell. And so whether they offered that property up as well.
So we do have an interest in pursuing that further.
We're absolutely looking into that and trying to come up with what we think is a suitable offer.
Good. I think that's mentioned in the master plan, partnerships, is it not? It is. And certainly we want to try to partner to make all of our government entities more efficient. Just adding this stuff up real quick, I'll never forget when Jack Hanna was a parks director and we were putting the CIP together, he stood up here and said we had a $50 million problem in our parks. And just adding this stuff up real quick, it added to 50 million. And now you've got COVID, so what is it? Because that's added to everything. We've got 12 million. So we obviously can't get to where all the recommendations are without some futuristic planning that will no likely be a major part of a next CIP extension. I see a few fingers up there on lights. Are you wanting to say something, Mr. Herron?
Yes, please. Nate, what consideration was given to handicap accessibility when we were evaluating parks?
A lot of consideration. So as part of our process, we went through and did an audit. We couldn't, 74 parks, we couldn't audit all 74 parks. So
Sure.
we went through and kind of established 10 typical parks that we did an audit on. And all of those parks showed that some deficiency in handicap accessibility. And so that is one of the highest priorities in the plan, is to begin addressing accessibility in your parks. So we were seeing, sidewalks that exceeded the allowable slopes, both longitudinally and laterally. We were seeing lack of sidewalks. We were seeing no accessible spaces or accessible spaces that exceeded the allowable slopes. So it would be a high priority to begin addressing.
Ms. Hankins.
Just to say how serious some of the decisions are that we make up here, we were talking about Harold Park a while ago, and I was driving around when I was first elected, and there were kids in that area playing basketball, but there wasn't a backstop, and the net was bad and that sort of thing, so I wanted to try to make sure that we got them a place to play basketball if they were going to, because I wouldn't want to remove that if that was going to be utilized. But I don't think these are decisions that are hard, because we want to make sure that kids, that's what we're looking at, is making sure that young families and kids have a place to play and to be. So I would acknowledge that one time I was there, the Greer Park had some activity going.
Well, even the low-hanging fruit, kind of the small gesture, you mentioned that. So, I believe we saw the same thing at Lee West Park. There was a basketball court there, but the goals and the nets in the back, were pretty dilapidated. And you guys recently went in partnership with the Thunder and redid that, and it's got new goals and new court surface. And the times that I've been by, it seems like there's someone there all the time. So the kids are just looking for nice facilities, and they're going to seek out, where you have the nicest amenities. So.
Nate, I have a question. In the report or the master plan, you did an analysis on distance to parks, right? And what is that typical distance to get to a park with let's call it your average amenities in an average park.
Yeah, so what we used was a standard, a national standard for the Trust of Public Lands, and so it's a 10-minute walk distance. A 5-minute walk is about a quarter mile, so yeah, about a half mile. And you guys are actually above the national average currently with your 74 parks. I believe it's 62%. Are within a 10-minute walk of all the neighborhoods, or each neighborhood in Lawton is within a 10-minute walk of 62%. So that's, a really good thing. But as we started to look at that, somebody mentioned redundancies earlier. There is an area of the city that has, 4 or 5 parks all within, 10 minutes of each other. So, that might be where it makes some sense to, maybe repurpose some of those. But yes, as you start to repurpose parks or get rid of those, then that percentage goes down. So
Okay, so if a 10-minute walk is a half a mile, then in a square mile, a couple parks would probably cover us, right? Properly placed. Okay.
yeah.
Okay, what about,
And it all depends on the road network and sidewalk network and, interconnectivity. If you think of a square mile and you've got parks at each corner. So
I want to ask about, are communities putting cameras in their parks to maybe watch them from one centralized place to improve? Is there anything going on like that?
we're seeing it's not prominent, but some communities are doing it. Yeah, I mean it's an expensive undertaking, but if you can have the ability to do it in conjunction with other IT services like Wi-Fi, putting Wi-Fi in parks, cameras. A lot of municipalities are going to centralized controls for like sports complexes, so they're able to turn on lighting and irrigation, from one location rather than sending people out, to turn on irrigation, at different places in the city or lights. So if you're going to go to the effort to put in the infrastructure for things like that, then it's easy if you're in there already to go ahead and add those data cables, and if you can't add the cameras now, at least get things in place so that at later time you can add them.
Okay, so we have a few companies putting in fiber optic throughout the city, and as long as fiber optic is there, it's fairly easy. All you need is electricity and some equipment, right?
Well, I'm not an IT expert, so I can't say for sure, but but if you've got fiber and you've got data cables, your data connections, then it ought to be a fairly...
So interestingly enough, we are in conversations with a fiber optic company, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but it's a very real possibility that we could have fiber intersections at a lot of our parks. So that is a segue. I thought it was just very apropos that somebody mentioned fiber to parks. We're in serious conversations about that, and wish I could say more about it right here, but nonetheless, most of your parks could potentially be served by fiber optic.
Okay, that's cool. Now, I just want to say I didn't have an imagination that we were paying somebody to watch all these cameras, but that they might be on somewhere, either the police department or the dispatch center, where somebody could kind of be glancing at them and see. So just throw that out there as well. Other questions? I guess the individual plans, it was a great one on Lee West Park. I saw this letter from the school, and they said that it says they have 5 acres on the east
side
of Lee West Park. Do we know about that?
That is one of the proposed land swaps that the public schools has put on in their proposal.
And in the layout we did, we included that 5 acres?
It was based on an assumption that we would be able to do something like
Okay,
that.
all right. Well, that was a really cool layout that we had, I thought, and it would be neat to have that on a certain number of parks, and we're working towards a goal.
Mayor, can I ask a question? Yeah, I was just kind of tossing that maintenance thing around. It's no doubt that all these parks are spread out, takes a lot of maintenance, a lot of travel time, a lot of things to try to maintain that much acreage that's so far apart. But at the same time, we're looking at taking some other parks, repurposing, and maybe making bigger parks. I mean, you take a look at the Gathering in Tulsa, that's a wonderful park. But I think of the amount of maintenance that it takes, to take care of a park with more stuff in it, the fiber and all of that. So I don't know if there's a variable in all of this when we're doing this as we're doing that, because we won't know how much maintenance time we would have if we were to build a Gathering until so we're not going to build a Gathering, but other parks we're looking at building bigger parks. And in that, down the road, is there some component in there where we're looking at balancing the maintenance costs with larger parks, more things in the parks and that?
Yeah, so what we looked at in regards to maintenance is we kind of did a high-level assessment. But ultimately, what that led to in the recommendations of the final plan is that we really feel there needs to be a standalone maintenance and operations manual put together for your parks. And that gives your park staff basically a playbook. It tells them how many hours they should be dedicating to, depending on the size of the park and the amenities in the park, how many hours they should be dedicating and number of people, based on the size of the park per week or.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
So.
Do other cities, I don't know, Dwayne, maybe you guys know, do other cities have not necessarily a separate division, maintenance division for their parks? Or what we do is we do it through our Parks and Recs department, that maintenance aspect. Do other cities do that, or because
Yes, they do, and it usually depends on the size of the municipality. Oklahoma City, they have a standalone parks maintenance division, and it's huge. You might go, and Norman and Edmond both have park maintenance departments as well, but you might go to some smaller towns, and their streets department is in charge of taking care of parks. They consolidate. So. It just depends. You see the many different approaches.
So Nate, when you guys did your analysis, right? And if I remember correctly, and Antonio's looking it up right now, but I believe we mow our parks 10 to 12 rotations per year. We have 700 acres of parks, so we're talking 8 to maybe more than 10,000 acres mowed or maintained every year. So when you talk about taking off, possibly reducing that amount by 100 acres, you're reducing that by 100 times 10 or 12. So you're talking about 1,000 to 1,200 acres or more possibly every year that we don't have to maintain. And that associated with the cost that you guys put into the master plan gets us to where we need to be to maintain, in order to better maintain the parks that we do have. Is that fair analysis?
It's pretty close, yeah. Yep.
Mayor, going back, I think, to what I was talking about earlier, and it's not important, I don't think, like you said, today, to decide what parks are going to be closed or repurposed or whatever, but the overall aerial view of this is that when we get done, we will have consolidated and lowered the number of acres. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this, because the reason we have parks that are unkept is because we don't have the funds to keep them up. And so we've got money in the CIP, but that can't be maintenance funds. That's got to be for amenities. That's got to be for equipment. That's got to be for infrastructure. So we really need to keep that in mind, because we will lower the number of parks. We will try to draw people into the parks that we will retain and make larger or have more amenities. And we need to remember that the ones that we keep need to be large enough or in a situation where they can have parking. Because the problem that we're running into, and Lee West is a perfect example, you start putting amenities there, and suddenly the people that live around the park have no place to park. They can't even get in and out of their driveways. And I say this mainly because those people will be on the phone to me. They all know that they are going to get a parking lot one way or the other, no matter what we do. But we need to focus on that when we start looking and listening and talking to our constituents, because we have to know that there's going to be other issues like parking that will change when we start making different uses of the parks.
There's a common theme there with our parks. Most of it is street parking. One of the residents that I spoke with the other day out at Willow Creek Park, that's one of their, and they had complaints that you can't get emergency vehicles down the roads because they're parallel parking on both sides. Citizens can't get out of their driveways. They're not happy. But it's a beautiful park and it's a nice area, and that's the reason it gets used. So those are some of the things that I would hope that through the CIP that we would be able to rectify some of those things, to include the parallel parking, even if we do cut-ins along the street, so that we can open the pathway up a little more. Their concerns had to do with not just the parking, but the kids running across the street in front of the cars trying to access the park. That was a significant issue with them. So, yeah, I got an earful Monday, but it was educational, and I appreciated everything that they had to offer. Off of 75th, Willow Creek Drive, as you...
I know where,
Micklegate?
by White Acres.
Yeah, White Acres.
Yeah.
That's the deal. In fact, I think there was a soccer club that was actually utilizing that area to host games and tournaments, stuff like that. So,
and just so you'll know, because I'm not sure that you got this message, this was before you got moved where you're in your current position, I did receive a call from a citizen that if we made that trade with the school for that 3.5 acres on Willow Park, that this individual would buy the playground equipment. So we'll keep that in mind, okay? Council? I think we got a good plan here to get us started. I wish we had plans like we have on Lee that are a start. For all of them, we don't. But we have a start of a place to get started for the staff to bring more recommendations to each council person to work on that. I think we've got, from what I'm hearing, if we have 2 well-placed parks in each square mile, we've probably got that 10-minute walk deal covered. We're at 60-some% now. I love the idea of Wi-Fi and being able to watch just to improve security where possible, and lots of tough decisions for our council ahead on this. Mr. Hampton.
Yes, I just had a quick question for the future. Where are we going from here? Do you have a kind of an outline of maybe the next couple of steps?
Yeah, there's an implementation plan, priority and implementation plan that's included. So it kind of outlines everything.
That's going to be part of this plan. So the next step is the implementation plan. As far as the where we're looking at the parks, the ones that the rating, those are going to be probably put into that. Those will have to somehow flow into that implementation plan, right?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that. Which parks would flow
well,
into?
we have the list of parks that are rated as to...
the repurposing.
Yeah, the repurposing. Will that flow into that repurposing plan for, of course, that's not going to be the final, but for information to bring back up as to how that would be implemented.
Yeah, so I mean that's part of the implementation plan, and the priorities is to begin to look at those repurposing. And again, we're just kind of setting the the initial steps of here's the technical criteria, and then as Mr. Ratliff mentioned, there's a whole nother level of going through and determining, if those, so you might have some that we've identified as, highly likely or high potential to be repurposed, but because of the deed restrictions and all that, they might have to be thrown out, and you might have to look at a couple more. So only city attorney's office can look at that.
Okay. Yeah, I would just, really, the crux of my question is, where do we meet again? And when we meet again, what will we be discussing at that point within the context of the plan? And I didn't know if that was already in place, or there's something that's going to happen in the future here.
Well, as far as immediate next steps go, we'll take our feedback that we got today and probably make a few final tweaks, and then this will come back before you again, I think on the 22nd. What we see a lot of communities do is once that's approved, if there is either a steering committee, or maybe you guys have your Parks Commission that's already in place, but that plan ought to be reviewed on an annual basis, and just kind of do a check-in and just make sure that you're keeping up with the recommendations in the plan, and communities change and needs change, and so you might get 2 years down the road and it needs to be adjusted a little bit, and that's something that you guys can do internally, as staff. But yeah, I mean, it's our hope that this just, this looks out, 15 years or so. But it's our hope that this plan just doesn't go on a shelf and gets referenced every so often, but that it's a valuable document for you and your community. And again, I think that once a year, kind of pull it off, review it, whether that's Parks Commission or just Parks Department, and just make sure that you guys are staying on track, or if it needs to adjust, that you're able to do that.
Okay, Mr. Warren.
I just wanted to make one quick comment. When we bring this back the next time, can staff give us some type of map that has floodplain or floodway laid over it? Because we ran into it in the meetings a month or so ago. We ran into one park that's a good example, like Country Club West. It's right there on Wolf Creek, and it's in either a floodplain or a floodway, and you can't even put like a backstop on that park. And so we need to I think we should probably look at that. Now, we may have to keep it because it does have a deed restriction, but we just have to mow it or let it go natural or something like that. But it would be nice to be able to have that map to see.
I believe through our GIS department, we have most of that information already that we could provide, and maybe even interactively right now. I'd have to go back and check, but yeah, it is. Okay.
And that was also a specific criteria within our repurposing criteria, is if there was floodplain.
Well, that said, I'd make a motion that we approve this plan and move forward.
Mayor and Council, we're not seeking approval of the plan today. This is just to receive the input. So we'll bring the plan back on February the 22nd at that meeting for formal approval.
I move to unmove that.
Thank you. Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, everybody's given their input, and so, but we will let you make a motion to adjourn. And we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Harris. Chapman. Hampton. Warren. Hankins.